Put a little bit of meat on the legal bones of these arguments going forward. And I'm going to talk a bit about culture, our way of life, and the importance of just being who we are as we move forward into the future. And what I've done is taken photographs from a traditional land use study in Northwest Saskatchewan, and I've added to it photographs that I've gathered as I visited around the governing members through the homeland at different events, and slid them in so that there's something there for all of us. All right, let's see if I can make this happen. One of the things that I always hear the community saying is that our land is our life. And when we go to the courts, we have to explain what that means. And part of what I think we get narrowed down to is thinking about culture as just the sash or song or music, and not adding to that the importance of language and our life on the land. Now, one of the things that you find in all of the factums, the Métis Nation of Alberta talks about land being essential to the well-being of the Métis. We look at the fact that the Métis were here first and that we must be reconciled with, well, what is it that passed through Confederation? Who were we before? What has passed through that Confederation door and continued to be the way that our people lived? What practices survived? And what exactly do we mean when we talk about the Métis relationship to the land? Now, Jean talked this morning about having different consciousness. But when we start looking at territories, how we have this social reality, this political reality, and then this physical reality of where we actually physically take ourselves on a day-to-day basis. Now, we know our collective consciousness. We recognized it there in 1869-70. We recognized it at the Michael Bay uprisings. We have the Battle of Seven Oaks. Jean also talked about the Battle of the Grand Coteau. Different occupations, the Battle of 1885. Over history, we look at our assertions of collective consciousness. Who is there at these events? Who are those people? Who are their families? Where did they live? It starts to give us some indication of boundary and territory, as Jean was talking about. Our annual Batoche Days, the different ways that we come together locally in our communities, and you know there are so many local community events where people go back to their traditional territories and just come together to share stories, because we know that the relationship with the land is very personal. It's very spiritual. It is that history and that memory of walking there as a child with an aunt or an uncle or a parent or a sister or a brother. These are part of our relationship that we need to explore. Now, the Supreme Court has recognized in Pauli that we have a special relationship to the land. They recognized that a key feature of that is hunting and fishing for food, right? They also recognized that the practices of that essential way of life have a right to evolve and change. So it's about the way things used to be done, but it's about how now they're done today, and our right to grow and take in new technologies and develop our approaches while still maintaining our sense of culture and commitment and value. Now, one of the things that I noticed looking through these photographs, and I think you might come to the same kind of conclusion. One of the things that you realize is that we also have a sense of personal identity. And we have asserted our identity in the way we make decisions as a community. For example, on citizenship. The court recognizes those laws that we ourselves practiced before Confederation. And one of those laws was defining who we were as a people and knowing who was in and who was not in. Now here's a young man. What is his date of birth? Didn't he make some comment about my birth date this morning? Okay. Who's older? No. But we have the Cunningham case. Cunningham has confirmed for us that we are a distinct people. We have the right to assert our identity, and that includes the determination of membership. Cunningham is very specific about that, and that the role of the Métis to define themselves has to be essentially the starting point for moving forward on citizenship issues. But they're also looking to other legal systems. I notice I've seen publications out of the MNO and out of the MMF on the laws of the hunt and the captains and the role of people. All of those things that we bring from our past and we continue to carry on today, these are the things the court will be looking for moving forward. So all the initiatives that are taking place within your governing members and in your communities are going to be essential to any claim to land and title down the road. So all we have to do is continue to be who we are. Now, one of the essential elements that we have to prove is that our cultural identity is linked to an ongoing relationship with our traditional territories. Now, we've all, many of the governing members, I think all, have started traditional land use studies where we're interviewing people, we're getting maps. It gives us a sense of time. What are people doing? Where are they doing it geographically? Who's with them? What are some of the values and things that are going on in that study? Jean talked this morning about effective control. How much of this is regulated by policy and at what time frame? When do we start conforming to legal policy and regulation at the provincial level? When do our trap lines start to fall within a trapping area that the government, when do we stop crossing over the provincial boundaries, or do we? Do we continue to practice across provincial bounds? What is it that is really going on? And it was some time ago, Jean was talking about how the duty to consult requires an initial assessment of the impacts, and yet we have to make these impact assessments without having any data. So all of the land use work that you're doing is going to become invaluable moving forward. Now, the other data that you get from here gives you a sense of duration, how long people are on the land, the seasonal nature of our land use, and the duration of time that people are there. One of the things we notice is that this generation uses less of that traditional territory than the generation before. You know, what are the impacts on that? Now, the other aspect I want to say is when we went through our traditional land use study, we gathered family photographs. So these photographs belong to families. Some we dug out of the archives, but for the most part, they're the same kind of photographs that each of you have in your photo albums at home. All right? But if you look at them, you know, one person at a time, you start to flip through it like a magazine, and you start to get a sense of what that way of life was like at different periods of time. Now, all the maps and things that Jean is telling you, that is like taking all of this raw data and pulling it all together so that we don't have to line up one Métis person after another and put them on the stand to give evidence. We kind of roll all the stories together where we can. So one of the things that I noticed going through the photograph collections is that there is a commercial activity that underlies everything. So you have, there's fur Today, 2002. There's the Trappers Associations. We have organizations that are continuing to meet and trying to maintain that way of life. There's scows and transport of goods down the riverways. There's the packers. I love the sailboat on the canoe. It's a very interesting idea. There's the fisheries. There's a meeting at St. Norbert of harvesters and users. We continue with our commercial activity historically, and we continue today. Certainly facing regulatory expectations, but in my opinion, the photos are showing, extensive commercial activity then and now. One of the things that the courts are recognizing about Métis Aboriginal rights is that there is a relationship to the land, but also to the resources on those lands. So as the Crown is moving forward and developing resources, it seems the Métis are always excluded from the discussions about resources. And so, one of the things that your land use studies and so on are going to provide evidence of is exactly what resources, where, when, and that the discussions with the Métis also have to include discussions about resource use and extraction, which also includes genetic resources. Now, looking at different occupancy patterns of Métis relationship to the land, we have semi-permanent. Semi-permanent, I was thinking, in northwest Saskatchewan, what you find is like a log frame, which is about 6 logs high, and people come in and they just put their tent on it. So the log frame stays and the tent travels with them across the different territories. So one of the things we have to look at is settlement. Here are families which are traveling along with the hunters. They just camp on the side. Go away. And then we come to the more settlement areas where people are drying fish and there's garden and preserving and whatnot. So you have seasonal movement with resources. Again, it's going to be a challenge to look at land use and to show one of the tests of exclusive use when we're looking at Aboriginal title, but certainly your photos are going to give some indication of how those lands were used. What you, I think, can also start looking at is conservation ethics and essentially ethics of leaving as little a footprint on the property as one can moving forward. So it seems kind of like a no-brainer to say the Métis culture is inherently tied to the land. But we have to be more specific and more detailed about these kinds of things going forward with evidence. The other aspect is about self-governance. How are the communities governed? And I just started looking for photographs and suggestions of where do Métis leaders come from? How are they selected? How do we come to know that these people are identified as leaders? Certainly we know the important role that our veterans have played, their sense of global community, their sense of peace and coming home, and that important vision that they brought to our communities when they came back from war and continue to bring to our communities. As well, the important role of women in that leadership role. We have lots of important leaders that have already gone, and women stepping up to the plate. We see them giving evidence in court cases of traditional knowledge and cultural practice. We see our elected leadership, how we're going forward in our governance strategies. The way we choose to govern ourselves. How was it done historically? Because those legal practices, those legal systems come forward unless they were otherwise extinguished, right? They survive and they get protected under Section 35. We have the honoring of Riel and our approaches to remembering where we've come from. And then at the community level, we have elders that we know, that everybody knows, made a huge contribution, often based on their skill as a resource user, recognized as leaders. This is people supporting a court case, coming out to give evidence. And then our political leaders just showing spirit and a sense of pride, you know, to the inspiring, the symbolic value of identity. The other thing that the photograph shows that there is a gender differentiation in terms of our knowledge and our approach to leadership and our engagement as a community. And I just want to, for a minute, look at the important role that the women play in all of this. The women have a very specific relationship to land and the way of life that they pass on to their children. And it's food, it's preservation of hides. I mean, if a person just thinks about the chemistry that's required, the knowledge of how to tan a hide, it's made with brains. I think there's probably something else in there. I'm not sure what it is, or how it's prepared, or when you know you should do it, and how you don't put that stick right through the middle of it. There's so much knowledge going on there and familiarity over time. And there's experimentation. You know, this works, here's a new tool. Will this work for us moving forward and make our life simpler as we carry out this work? There's the medicinal aspects of what's going on. The beautiful beadwork that just picks up our spirits. The different symbols and, you know, all the different beadwork that's here today. Jean talked about that this morning as well. And how to live out there, how to cook without a stove, and feed a whole family. I mean, how long? How are you preserving things? How do you smoke fish anyway? What's the temperature? What kind of boughs are you using on the smoke so that it doesn't taste like your shoe? It just seems so amazing to me. I would be so fired. And then also the women playing such an essential part of the economy and the family business. And all the things that we love. And the beautiful beadwork that they make for our families as gifts. There was an article that talked about women being part of the gift economy. It's an economy that we don't really value. We don't really want to pay the amount of time and energy it takes to make a beautiful beadwork jacket. We're really looking for a sale on that. And then the other essential aspect, which is the passing down to one another. And I know my friends are going to talk about this as we talk about language and music, about how it is that we know the things we know today. You know, dragging the little kids along and having them be part of that life. Today, maybe it's during the summer months when they're not in school. Are the summer months when you can teach trapping? When do you trap? In the spring. Where are they in the spring? They're in school. So it's on the weekends now, perhaps. Maybe it's culture camp weeks during school break. You know, we've had to modify the way we practice and live on the land. But the culture is there. The value is there. He doesn't look very happy about learning this, but he's learning nonetheless. And the important role of teaching. Our teachers used to be people that loved us. It's a very different education system. Smoking fish, just setting up camp. And then the fun parts of life on the land. And then we talk about kinship. Who's there? Who are those people? Looking at when your stories cross over with other people and when that's no longer your story, right? And the kinship aspect of that, and extended families. who's out there at that time, carrying out the work of the family, going fishing on a Sunday afternoon, taking the kids on a boat ride, or as part of the commercial fishing endeavor, they just jump on that boat. And then we come to our oral traditions, which is also part of that relationship to the land. The importance of Michif language and storytelling, and most importantly, the fiddle music. So as we move forward, it's important to be who we are, to use the lands that we use, to keep going. It's the work that you're doing, each of you in your communities, that is going to give the lawyers something to argue with down the road. So with that, I'll turn